Okay, hello VC. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, if you've seen my other videos, I focus mainly on classical music, but today I thought I would talk about something as a rock and roll fan and someone who comes across a lot of, or not too many threads on Canadian pressings, and today I would discuss probably one of the most discussed albums on the Hoffman forums and on Reddits and various videos, Zeppelin 2. So, I've read a few things online about the first Canadian pressings of Zeppelin 2 and how they sound great and how some people think that they sound better than the RLs. So I came across what's called a TG pressing, which just inscribed in the dead wax of the Canadian pressings, it says TG, which people have discovered to just be a code for T being pressed in Toronto, and the G meaning a good source. So they got a good tape source. And a lot of the Canadian pressings later on in the 70s would use similar codes in order to denote the sources that they had. So quickly, I'll just show. They have the famous Canadian red label. So any Zeppelin that you see on this red Atlantic label is going to be basically a first pressing. And that only counts for the first three Zeppelin albums. So 1, 2, and 3. Now, I had a TG. They're hard to find in good condition, I must say. After searching for a while, I found a red label Canadian in good VG Plus condition that is GM. So what I believe to be Good Source Montreal. It sounds almost the exact same as the TG. They're slightly cheaper. It's just because the TG is the record that people talk about the most from Canadian pressings. So I got that. I thought it sounded fantastic, good bass, good everything, but I couldn't get off of my mind the RL. And just as a point here, I don't think it's worth it to spend that much money on a real RL, a US RL, those are Monarch pressings. So what I did instead was for like 50 bucks, you can get the German pressing, which I have here. I can show it. It's just the standard green and orange Atlantic label. So only the first side of this record is an RL cut. If you don't know, that stands for Robert Ludwig, the guy who cut this infamous record, which eventually got recalled because of the whole story of the president of the Atlantic Company's daughter, the record skipping. If you want to hear more about the RL copy, there's tons of videos on that. That's not the purpose of the video. Anyways, I got this RL pressing and I wanted to really hear how different it is from the Canadian. And, you know, I listened to it back and forth. Actually, before I talk about the pressing, I thought I'd just discuss my system because, you know, there's really no point in me discussing the sound quality of a record if no one knows what my system is. So I live in a mid to large size room. I have a Rega P6 with a Rega LXR integrated amplifier with Paradigm Premier 800F speakers. Also an acoustically modified room with Gaia 3 speaker stands for the bass absorption and things like that. So I have a decent system which allows me to hear definitely a difference between these two records. And I'll just go right off the bat that even though some people say that the Canadian is better than the RL, it's not. I'm just going to put that out there right now. The RL sounds fantastic. I have also listened to a later 70s UK pressing of Zeppelin 2, which I don't own. Sounds horrible. Don't get any of the later 70s UK pressings. I have yet to hear a plum, so a first UK pressing or second UK pressing of this album. I hear some good things about it, but not really many people discuss it that much because everyone just wants to talk about the RL. So what's the difference? The Canadian pressing is really rough, like kind of rough, like in a way that a rock and roll record should sound. It's loud, it's thunderous, it's cut very hot. And that's what I think people love about the RL, how much of a hot cut it is. And even though this Canadian one is really hot and you really got to mess with the volume a little, the RL is even hotter than that one. And this isn't an RL SS cut. This is just the standard RL. So it's not even as hot as the hottest pressing can get. But specifically about the Canadian, the bass is loud. It fills the room. The drums are really thunderous. The guitars, I feel like, are a little crunchy. More crunchy than what you hear on the RL. Like, you know, not crunchy in the sense that it's a distorted guitar. Obviously, it's a distorted guitar. It's a hard rock record. But it just doesn't, it kind of feels like a bit distortion on the source that they have, not the guitar, if you know what I mean. And the voice is a bit back. I think the main difference between the two is the Canadian pressing has the voice is further back. It doesn't sound as good. There's some extra sibilance, and I think it's a bit distorted. So that's what I heard. And then I listened to the RL. It's better, you know. I'll say by how much in a second. I'll first talk about some of the details, which I have on my notes here. It's a cleaner bass. It's a very loud bass. I would say like the same level of bass, but it's cleaner, less boomy, I would say. The drums, you can hear the drums, like the specific things that Bonham is doing, clearer. The voice is much more forward. That's the bigger difference. Robert Plant really just comes right out of the speakers, right at the front, especially right at the start of Whole Lotta Love. And it's hotter. It's clear. It's more analytical. How much better is it? To my surprise, it's not. I think there's just too much hype around this RL cut, because I would say like 85%, you get about 85 to 90% of the RL with the Canadian pressing. And I know this is a bit controversial because a lot of people just absolutely love this record to death, but that 15%, yeah, sure, if you're a huge Led Zeppelin fan and you love this album, this is one of my favorite albums of all time, so I love Led Zeppelin too, but no way in hell am I going to go spend $1,000 or whatever, $500 to $1,000 for a VG copy of this RL, right? It makes absolutely no sense to me. Why would you pay that much money for this record, which is not really like an audiophile recording to begin with? It sounds really good. It's definitely their best in their catalog, and it's really thunderous, but you know, it's doesn't really make much sense. And also, people are buying these copies in VG condition, and they're kind of compensating by saying that the record is really loud, it's a really hot cut, which it is, and that masks all of the surface noise. But usually these records from 1969, the problem isn't always just surface noise. It's not just those little scratches that crackle. It's the grooves being worn down, you know, people not having the proper tracking force. A lot of the times these records are distorted, especially near the inner grooves, so like that inner groove distortion, and that messes with the dynamic range of the record. So I was lucky to get this German RL in the side one RL in near mint condition about. And it's, you know, it's nice to hear. It's not all loud, and it's not just like rock and roll for 20 minutes straight or however long the side is. So, you know, in my opinion, not worth it. The point of this video that I'm trying to make, or the reason why I made this video, is because everyone's talking about the RL, everyone's talking about how the UK isn't good, and everyone's trying to compare RL US's / the German pressing as well with the UK pressings, which you don't need. You know, not a lot of people talk about the Canadian pressing. I've only seen a few forums where they talk about it, and they really praise the Canadian pressing, but they've never directly compared it to the RL from what I have seen. So, if you want a Canadian, or if you want a good pressing of Led Zeppelin 2, 85% of what the RL can give you, get the Canadian. They're hard to find in clean condition, but they shouldn't be too expensive. Getting a good VG Plus to a near mint, like a decent VG Plus, which is definitely good for this record. You know, you're not listening to early Bob Dylan or whatever. A good VG Plus copy for about like 40 to 50 Canadian dollars. And that's reasonable for a record first pressing from 1969, right? So that's my recommendation. What I do personally is, if I want to listen to the record, I play the side 1 German and then I play the side 2 Canadian. You know, sometimes I'm lazy. I just play, if I want to listen to the whole record, I just play the Canadian because I know there isn't a huge difference between them. But like I said, there is a difference. Maybe my system's not good enough to really make the RL shine, but I don't honestly see how, you know, even if you had like those $1 million systems, why you would buy it. I mean, if you had $1 million system, then you can fork out $5K for a near mint RL monarch pressing or whatever. But you know, for the average Joe, then it makes absolutely no sense to me to spend that much money. So pay $100, get a nice German RL, and get yourself a Canadian GM in the dead wax or TG in the dead wax. The TGs are more expensive because people talk about them. I have a TG as well. I have it somewhere here. Same label, Red Atlantic. Not really a big difference. The only thing that I might say is different between the GM and the TG is the TG might have a little more bass. But it's hard for me to do a direct comparison because the TG that I have is VG, low VG, so not very good at all. But this GM copy that I got for $40 sounds great. Montreal pressing. So yeah, that's the basic thing that I wanted to talk about in this video. Get the Canadian pressing, screw the scalper prices and whatever. I know there wasn't that many of the original RLs, but absolutely no point in my opinion of buying it. So if you do end up buying this record, let me know what you think is the difference on your system. Have you compared the Canadian pressing with the RL pressing, and did you come to the same conclusion that I had? And if you do have an opinion about the sonic quality of these, please put your system description. I would love to hear what people think is the sound difference that they hear with the system that they are using. So anyways, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think. Like the video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and yeah, leave a comment. Thanks.